It's Matthew Elmer here with Smart Company. I hope you're all well. Thanks for joining us on today's webinar in conversation with Kate Carnell. We have Kate Carnell, the Australian Small and Family Business Ombudsman, with us today. Kate, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Matthew. I think we're all really busy at the moment, but you know, we do live in very unusual times.
Indeed. And look, we've got half an hour today and we're keen to get to as many of your questions as we can. So please feel free to leave questions in the chat box provided to you on the Zoom webinar, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So without further ado, keen to jump into things. Kate, the first thing I wanted to ask you about today is sort of the mental health side of this entire thing. You know, business owners have been pulling Herculean hours over the last few months trying to keep themselves afloat. And mental health has been a problem in the small business space for a long time. There's been some initiatives that have been brought out in the sector over the last few weeks to sort of help businesses with that. I was wondering maybe if you could give us an overview of My Business Health and everything that's happening in that space.
Sure. Matt, what we thought was important, you know, I have a small business background, so do many of my staff, was to try to bring together how to look after your business and how to look after yourself in one site. So My Business Health does exactly that. And you can get to it via our website or just My Business Health. So Spiffio will get there as well. So what we do in that site, Matt, is balance looking after your business and looking after yourself. And we try to make it as simple as we can. So in terms of looking after your business, you can go into the site, go into the COVID-19 part of the site, because there's a new bit that has all of the initiatives that the government has put on the table for small businesses, but in a very simplified manner. So you can go in, you can choose whether you're a sole proprietor or a small business. You can have a look at what's available for cash flow, for utilities, but also we pull that together with the very real understanding that this has got to be the most stressful thing that has ever happened to most people. You know, most small businesses, as we know, their house is riding on this. Their house is, you know, the thing that their business is, you know, is leveraged against. They've put in many years into this. It's about family. It's extraordinary. And so it's really important for small business owners to understand that looking after themselves is as important as looking after their business. Because if you crash and burn as a small business owner, then you're not going to be in much of a state to be able to be there to pull your business out the other end. Important too to look after your staff, because many of your staff will also be in all sorts of, you know, of trauma off the back of this, not knowing whether you're planning to reopen, what the plans are. Make sure you stay talking to your staff, communicating with your staff, and hopefully bringing your staff in on the planning approaches for going forward. But do go to My Business Health because, you know, mental health issues happen to everyone. I've suffered from mental health issues during my life. I had anorexia as a teenager. 1 in 4 Australians experience mental health problems. So don't feel you're on your own. This is common. Many of us go down this path. And so don't feel ashamed. You know, this is important.
Yeah, and speaking personally as well, I've gone through my own struggles with mental health, and, you know, reaching out, especially when you're in a position where you are struggling, it can be incredibly important. And I think for small business owners, you know, there's often a feeling that they're stressed just because they're running a small business, but, you know, those are real mental health challenges. And, you know, it's great that there are sites like My Business Health that can help people sort of address those needs while also providing advice. And I think that's crucial as well about the things they can do to safeguard their businesses at times like this as well. The one other thing I wanted to ask you, you know, about this program is sort of the feedback that you've had through, you know, around the industry about the mental health challenges at this time, and sort of what your personal message would be to business owners who are struggling at the moment and are looking at systems like this and accessing them for help.
We've been working really closely with Beyond Blue on this. I must admit, I do have a conflict of interest. I am deputy chair of Beyond Blue and was CEO of it for a few years. But it's a good organisation. It has focused on small business for a long time. So my message is, please come to my business health. We've got some great advice there, using a lot of Beyond Blue's expertise. But really good news is Beyond Blue's been funded to provide a coronavirus support service, which you can get by coronavirus.beyondblue.org.au. And it's got a phone number as well for those that don't want to spend time on websites. And it's 1-800-512-348. But you can see that at the top of the website, and you get to speak to a mental health professional at the other end of this. So there's good advice on the website, but also if you need to, there's someone to talk to. And you can't go through this all yourself. The message is, seek some help. If you can't sleep, if you're stressed, if you're having trouble concentrating, if you feel overwhelmed, it's normal to feel that way, but you do have to look after yourself so you can come through the other end.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice, and I think timely as well for lots of people listening in on the call. I'm really also keen, and sort of to change tack a bit to some more technical things. Obviously the JobKeeper application's open this week, and that was big news to some. Probably 800,000 firms have expressed interest in that. There's a lot going on at the moment. The ATO is starting to consider applications, and people are filing them. What are you hearing from people around the industry at the moment about the way that that's going, and in terms of feedback about the ATO processes and how small businesses are managing to make applications?
Look, obviously there's some real concerns, Matthew. Some of the concerns are things like the cash flow issue. The JobKeeper payment is a payment for the previous month rather than a prospective payment. So businesses have got to be able to pay their staff over this month to get the payment, hopefully in the first week or so of May. So they've got to be able to manage the cash flow in that space. You've got to have paid your staff by the 30th of April is the story. So you don't have to have paid them in the first 2 weeks, but you have to pay them for the two lots of 2 weeks for the month by the 30th of April. And then on the basis of your application, you will get the money, in about a week to 10 days. So concerns about cash flow is really important. And businesses should remember that there are a range of places that you can get cash from, and those are on the My Business Health website. But there is these small business guarantee loans, which are now available from banks, from a number of non-bank lenders, some fintechs, and some of the consumer-owned banks as well now. So, it is really overwhelming, but there are options for you to get involved in this. Yeah. The other issue is eligibility. And I think we'd all like absolute confidence that we were absolutely eligible, and we'd like the ATO to send us a document saying, you are eligible, you are fine.
Sure.
Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. And because it's a self-assessment approach. And so you have to assess whether you are eligible based upon the information that is available. And that's a little difficult because some of the information isn't quite there yet, particularly for areas where the Commissioner has discretion. And that's for businesses that haven't been operating for 12 months. So they can't look back 12 months to, for evidence that they've had a 30% reduction. Yeah. And also for businesses that are really lumpy in revenue. But the real message here to everyone is, look, if you're running a business or you're a sole proprietor, and you have had a significant reduction in your revenue of around about 30%, then the intent of the policy is for you to be in it, you to be in. So, if you believe you are in, then you should go ahead and register and get involved in this. And I know that you, with the great stuff you've written, the work we're doing, will certainly put your case up if you're struggling to get approved.
Indeed, and my emails are always open. No, very keen to hear from people if they do have issues in those areas. Kate, while we're on JobKeeper, there's been a lot of talk about the tax commissioner discretion. The ATO has promised details on an alternative test and a legislative amendment, but we sort of don't know when that's going to happen at this point, and firms that want to get payments for April are sort of running out of time. What can you really say, or what do you know about sort of where the discussions are with that at the moment, and what are you really expecting the ATO to say on that front?
Look, the ATO are talking to us and a number of others, and they're trying to plough through this to get something that that works. But the points I just made is, if you haven't been trading for 12 months, that's fine. You will fall into that category if you can show that you've had approximately a 30% reduction. If you've had a 30% reduction and you have lumpy revenue, you will be in the mix. If your business has changed fundamentally over that 12-month period, you bought another business, you're a startup, but your business has fallen off a cliff right now, you are inside the intent of the policy. So I think you should assume you're going to be okay. And get your application in. Can I just ask for all those people who think they could find a way to scam this system, could you please not do it? Because that will cause a problem for everyone. And we're starting to see some scams around the edges, some people trying to game the system. Not okay. This is a national crisis, not a time for people who think they can play the system.
Indeed, and that sort of leads me to the next question I wanted to ask. There seems to have been some reporting coming out recently that employers are sort of saying, they might not nominate some employees, they might nominate others, or that they might hold back some of the JobKeeper payments for administration fees. It seems like that some of that might be coming from a place of confusion around what employers need to do if they do access this scheme. Could you perhaps explain, just give a brief overview of what employers need to make sure they do, or what their obligations are if they are accepted into the JobKeeper program?
If you're taking the $1,500 for a staff member, then you have to pay the staff member $1,500. It's that simple. No taking a bit off the side. And if you're found to be doing deals with staff where you split the difference, not okay. Not appropriate, certainly not legal, and you will be in all sorts of trouble at some point in the future. So don't do it. Just accept that your staff, and by the way, if you're in the system, you have to enrol all of your eligible staff, not just the ones you like. The ones that were on your books on the 1st of March that were full-time, part-time or long-term casuals are in. You've then got to give them the employer eligibility form to fill in. You've got to keep a copy, and then you've got to pay them $1,500 a fortnight. The other thing you've got to remember is you can't say to somebody you used to pay $5,000 a fortnight that, now I'm going to pay you $1,500, but guess what? You're going to work the same hours and do the same job. No, not at all. If you're going to reduce their salary, you've got to reduce their hours. You've got to make this fair. But the point of this is to keep your staff together, to keep your business in a place that you're in a position in a few weeks or a few months' time to get your business up and running quickly without having to go back and get new staff and train them and whatever.
Sure.
So great opportunity to do some staff training right now. Just focus on, and there's some great training modules out there. Many of them are free. So
Indeed.
Great opportunity.
The other interesting thing is the universities are working with the federal government to release a bunch of new short-term courses that people and employees can look at as well. So that's always an option also. Kate, one of the other things I was interested in asking you was sort of about the prospect of reopening. The government sort of changed the messaging over the last week and has started looking more towards reopening and reopening timelines, and they're saying maybe about a month, over the next month they'll review things. How should businesses be thinking about the reopening timeline at the moment if they are subject to trading restrictions or affected by their suppliers or people in their industry being subject to trading restrictions?
Well, I think it's really important now to put in place a plan. There is every chance that, in fact,
Everyone, it seems like Kate may have intermittently cut out, so we'll just sort of wait for her to reconnect on her end. But we will, in the meantime, I can provide some additional clarity about these lockdown restrictions and when they might end. So essentially last week, the federal government held a press conference after a national cabinet meeting and basically decided that over the next 4 weeks, they would come to a decision about whether they would relax some of the trading restrictions that were put in place in March. That includes restaurants and cafes only being able to do delivery and takeaway services. It includes gyms and other outdoor fitness businesses not being able to operate and things of that nature. And of course, beauty salons and hairdressers, which we heard a lot about, not being able to resume their normal operations. And those restrictions have obviously seen a lot of retailers shut down, even though technically they're not supposed to, or that they're not forced to. So over the next 4 weeks, the government said they're going to consider those restrictions and whether or not they need to remain in place. They've said they're going to be prioritising businesses that are low risk and high value to the economy. So, you know, if your business or your industry is low risk for spreading the virus, but is high value in terms of its services to the community or the economy, and there are a lot of businesses struggling in that area, they're going to consider easing restrictions as best they can. But obviously that is dependent on ongoing medical advice. And what they've said around that is that they want Australia to improve in 3 broad areas before they can really start easing these lockdown restrictions. Those include improving contact tracing, improving testing, and improving local response capabilities. So essentially, to put that in a nutshell, what the government really wants to do here is improve its ability to respond to the pandemic. And if Australia can do that to a satisfactory level, they're going to be put in a position where they can start easing some of these restrictions. I think the important thing to note here is that the government have definitely said they want to open the economy as soon as they can. I think Kate might be rejoining.
Hi, Matt. We've got the ongoing problem of links that fall out these days.
No worries. I'm not sure who we should blame, Malcolm Turnbull or Kevin Rudd, but I'm sure they'd have a debate about that if they were on the webinar. Why don't we resume back to where we dropped off? You were talking about the lockdown restrictions, and I've just sort of been explaining what the government's been saying around that, but I'm really interested to get your perspective on what those discussions are looking like at the moment with government.
Well, look, I think what we're going to find is in about 4 weeks' time, maybe even sooner, we're going to start seeing a reopening, and the less dangerous or the less dramatic sorts of workplaces, ones that are easy to social distance, will come first. But really, for businesses generally, their challenge is to be able to reopen safely and to have in place a mechanism to do it. It might mean you have to change your approach to cleaning in your business, like cleaning down counters regularly, having capacity for people to use hand sanitizers, what you might do in terms of distancing your staff, or there's a whole range of things, and it'll depend on your business. But when this happens, you want to be in a position to get up and running quickly, not to be messing around for weeks trying to work out how you're going to do it. So I think that's the message. Get your plans in place, get your website up to speed. Make sure that you're ready with that page to say, hey, we're reopened. Be ready with the email out to your customers to tell them you're back. All of those things that will give you an opportunity to hit the ground running. There's the challenge.
Yeah. Indeed. And the government have said that they're thinking about high value, low risk businesses. What does that mean in your mind from the perspective of these restrictions? Should, hairdressers and beauty salons feel like they're in that camp, or things along those lines?
Look, I think in the first instance, they'll probably do some of the easy ones, office-based approaches. Most manufacturers have continued to operate. So, manufacturing is obviously important, but, if there are ones that haven't, that have closed, we've fairly obviously got to ensure that all of our agricultural space is up and running well. It's for many of our farmers, this is a good time. This is the time for planting and other things. So we've got to make sure that all of those things are operating well. But then we are going to see, a range of the customer-focused businesses, the cafes, the restaurants, the retail outlets, the beauty salons. I really desperately need my nails done, so I'd like the nail salons to open, but they are quite close. So, I think the challenge for businesses is to say, how am I going to do this? Are customers going to wear masks? Are my staff going to wear masks? What makes me comfortable in this space? So I think what we'll find is office-based staff will go pretty quickly. Any health-related businesses that are closed we'll try to get them reopening. Personal services, absolutely. I think the mass, the sort of businesses that have masses of people like pubs and so on are going to have to think long and hard about how they're going to do it with social distancing. And if they can show they can, well, they've got a much better chance of being able to reopen than if they can't really.
Sure. And hopefully they do work that out soon, because I'm dying to the pub.
Well,
on this
after I have my nails done, Matthew. Okay.
I think there'll be a lot of people getting out once we do see these reopenings start happening. On that topic, we've had a lot of questions from readers about the timeline of these shutdowns, and obviously the government's hibernation strategy has sort of been outlaid on a 6-month time frame, and you'd expect that to start teetering off around September. But there's sort of concern that customers still might not be wanting to go out, or shopper numbers might still be down, and that will ease back in over time. What are you thinking in terms of what support might be available for businesses sort of in that interim after the government support sort of expires, before, maybe the last part of this year when people are still feeling quite fretful about being out in the community and social distancing is still in place and things like that?
I think there's the challenge for business planning around this. There'll be things that businesses have done in this interim space. We've heard lots of great pivots, we'll call them, that businesses have done, whether it's providing services or goods online, takeaways, deliveries, all sorts of things. The challenge is really, so which of these do you keep? Which ones are going well? And how do you integrate this with your ongoing business? Because it's not going to go from 0 to 100%. It's going to, business is going to go up over time, which is the reason communicating with your customers, if you can, is really important as to what you're providing now, what you might provide in the future. I think it's going to be important for government to have a look at another stimulus package, which will be the get up and operating stimulus package, because for some businesses, they're going to have to restock. There's going to be a range of costs that they're going to need to have, to get up and running again, but they won't have had much revenue for what will be a number of months now. And so there'll be some challenges around that. And I think government and state governments are going to have a real look at what those are. And so are we as business people. There are some pretty low interest loans and other things available at the moment. So it's a bit of a challenge getting that balance right. And of course, right now, the biggest questions we're getting is about the mandatory commercial rental code. And so really important for businesses to sit down with their landlord and get an agreement in place that is sustainable in the long term, not just for 2 months or 3 months.
Indeed, and we did actually have an interesting question come through about that I wanted to ask you about. We've had a number of other businesses ask us about this over the past few weeks, but there've been a few businesses that say they've got an agreement with their landlord under the mandatory code, but it's sort of not what they wanted, or you know, it lasts for 6 months and then they're worried, you know, that they're going to get a rent increase after that, or that perhaps they might be churned through their store after the 6-month period. You know, what's your advice for businesses that are worried about what's going to happen with landlords once this code expires, and how landlords might sort of react to the economic realities of the day once that happens?
It's really important to remember what the code says. Now, there should be a rental reduction that's proportional to your reduction in turnover, but half of that rental reduction, well, half needs to be rent reduction and half can be deferred rent under the code. And for that deferred rent, it's got to be capitalised or amortised over at least 24 months. So if your landlord is trying to say, well, here's all the rent that you owed us over the last 6 months, you've got to pay us now. No, that's straight to mediation and it's mandatory and it's not in line with the code. It's also not reasonable to have rent increases for not just at the end of the time, but for the next 24 months either. Everyone gets that things aren't going back to normal, you know, in September or whenever the economy reopens properly. It's going to take a couple of years, really. So really, really important for tenants to ensure that their landlord understands what's in the code, you know, and states are starting to legislate that. And also, if they have a problem, you know, go to mediation on it. There's mediation at state level, and of course, we can organise that too. There are protections here, but I do accept that there are some landlords that are being fantastic, and we've heard some wonderful stories about landlords helping, and then we're seeing some others who don't believe it's their problem. Well, the fact is it's everyone's problem.
Indeed, that's certainly been my experience too, hearing the stories of landlords offering reductions even before this code of conduct come into place was very encouraging. But obviously, some landlords are taking a different approach, and I guess that's what the code has really been brought in place for. We've got one on a topic that's I think close to both of our hearts, but you've done a lot of work on very recently, and that's payment time. So we've got a business in the webinar that's sort of just been told by one of their multinational suppliers that they've been encouraged to offer a 20% discount on their invoices if they want them paid before July, which is, you know, probably still a few months away. What's your advice to businesses at the moment who are going through these issues? Because there are a lot of them where big business suppliers are saying because of the pandemic, they can't get invoices paid within, you know, even 3 months.
Come to us and we'll help them with it, because it's not acceptable, Matthew, just not. The reason we're saying that there really needs to be legislation in this space is that although there's lots of businesses that are doing the right thing, unfortunately there's a lot of big ones, particularly multinationals, that have used COVID-19 to push out payment times that normally have payment times that are totally unacceptable. You know, we saw some contracts with the 2 major department stores, you know, that were 4-month payment times. You know, how can anyone deal with those sorts of things? It's not okay. So if a business is saying to you, we'll only pay you if you give us a big discount, well, tell them you're just coming to see the ombudsman, because it's actually not reasonable and it's not fair, particularly not at the moment. You know, there's better ways to operate if you really have to. Some supply chain finances are actually quite good if you have to use them, but people should pay their bills on time. It's that simple.
Sure. And just lastly and quickly on that, because I think we are running out of time, but we've also had other questions from readers throughout the week about the payment times reporting framework. The government's obviously working on that, but there hasn't been a lot of public announcements in recent months. There are a lot of people excited about the prospect of some real transparency around payment times for big businesses. What can you tell us about where that's at the moment and what's coming next?
Look, the government is committed to it, and Michaelia Cash has certainly done a chunk of work in this space. But as our recommendation 2 in our supply chain financing report says that we released this week, you know, this has got to be sped up. This is really important. Getting large businesses with turnovers of over 100 million to report their payment times, and importantly, Matthew, to have an audit approach, because if all they have to do is report and there's no audit, it isn't going to work. Voluntary codes don't work. If there needs to be some big sticks in this space for those that do the wrong thing. The UK has a reporting framework like this, and it took a very long time to get businesses to actually report. And then some of those reports, and these are major companies that also trade in Australia, you'd have to ask questions about how truthful maybe some of those reports were. It's the reason it's the reason the UK has tabled new legislation to mandate 30-day payment times.
Indeed, and it will be very interesting to see whether our government sort of follows suit, and look forward to hearing about further updates about that in the future. But look, I think that's all we have time for today, everyone. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much, Kate, for joining us. It's been great to hear about the latest that's going on and all the advice for businesses at the moment. If we couldn't get to your question, I apologise. Please do send your questions through to news@smartcompany.com.au. We can get to them all and we can provide you as answers as best we can. But in the meantime, thanks very much for tuning into the webinar today, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day and week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.